This week on Quality Digest Live, what do we mean when we use the term data?
Plus, why leadership is more important than strategy. That and more when we come back.
Welcome back to Quality Digest Live for January 8th, 2016. 2016, Dirk.
Wow.
New year, that's right, we're
right.
in it. QDL, of course, is your weekly look at who and what is making the news in the world of quality. I'm Mike Richmond, publisher of Quality Digest.
And I'm Quality Digest Editor-in-Chief, Dirk Ducharme. Well, here is a great story for you eco-tech nerds out there, ecological technology, let's say. Material scientists at Jena University in Germany are working on a technology that can generate electricity, reduce CO2 emissions, and shed heat using Windows.
What version?
Windows 7, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, okay. Researchers for the LAWIN, that's LAWIN, which stands for Large Area Fluidic Windows Project, are developing windows, the kind that go on buildings, that provide highly efficient solar energy harvesting and heat exchange through an active building envelope. So think of a building with lots of windows, and most commercial buildings are mostly windows, so this kind of makes sense. So according to Professor Lothar Wondracek of University of Jena's Otto Schott Institute of Materials Research, quotes, essentially, we want to enclose a building in a layer of liquid and control the temperature. Now, the liquid they're talking about is a liquid contained in these windows. So to do this, researchers have developed something they call a structured glass embossed with microfluidic channels through which a functional fluid circulates. And this allows you to do a lot of things. And by the way, kind of what we're talking about is if you had 2 layers of glass and sandwiched in between them are a bunch of little tiny channels that fluid flows. So that's the basic idea. It allows you to do a lot of things. So number one, by adjusting, let's say, the color, for lack of a better word, of the fluid, you can adjust how much light it absorbs, transmits, or reflects. You can also use that fluid to transport the collected heat gathered by the window and the fluid in the window to a heat pump to generate electricity. So the project consortium aims to reduce embodied energy and CO2 to 0 for window surfaces after just 4 months of use. LAWIN also aims to improve thermal insulation figures for window surfaces by at least 20% and to reduce the energy spent during the complete life cycle of a building by 10%. Now these are sizable numbers when it comes to energy efficiency in a commercial building. Of course, as you might imagine, there are some technical challenges, and the biggest one, I told you about this glass. A lot of people don't realize, you look at a plane of glass and you think it's flat. It's flat to the naked eye, but it isn't really flat. They tend to be somewhat wavy. So one of their problems is embossing these 1 millimeter wide microchannels in the glass and then laminating the other piece of glass over the top. And to do this, the glass has to be really flat. Today's rolled glass panels are too wavy to do this, so they're having to develop new process equipment and adapt glass production processes in order to do this, so that they're going to get a higher quality and very flat piece of glass to do this. But they're on track. So the current prototype will be installed in model buildings in both Northern and Southern Europe in 2017 to account for the different climatic conditions that you would expect in both those regions. Then the actual results will be tested against simulation models. The results from the tests and the simulations will then be used to tweak window parameters such as the flow of the rate of the fluid through the windows, the size of the channels, we mentioned 1 millimeter, but that's just an estimate right now, and the pressure of the fluid within the channels. Then the results of these tests will be integrated into models used to design the buildings. Estimates are the high-end windows will cost 2.5 times more than the state-of-the-art triple glazed windows that are in some commercial buildings right now, but the higher price they expect will be partly offset by the energy savings as well as the advanced functional or aesthetic features you have just by the nature of the design of these windows. So it's pretty cool stuff, kind of little nerdy, techie kind of things, but these windows that actually are going to collect heat for you and actually generate electricity. So kind of cool.
Really cool. You know, what strikes me about that, which is interesting, is this idea that the one innovation led to another. I mean, this idea that the glass was wavier. You know, in order for this process to work, you need to redesign another piece of it, and that's kind of always how it works, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
You know, you find that innovations touch on other things, and that you need to innovate within an innovation, and really you have a system that really is an innovative system.
You're right. I mean, it's interesting. I mean, up to this point, we don't worry about, you know, how flat is the glass in my window.
Right.
I mean, even with double paned or triple paned, you're still using conventional glass. It's more how it's constructed and the gas that goes in between them and all that. But nobody worried about the flatness of the glass. Well, now you got this new technology. It's going to drive another technology.
Better glass.
Better glass. Which may have some other benefits in other industries you don't know.
So we don't even know yet.
Yeah, exactly.
That's
Curious.
Great stuff. All right, thanks, Dirk. All righty, well, from all indications, 2016 is going to see game-changing advances in the automotive industry, from further refinement in autonomous vehicles to the increasing accessibility of connected devices in your car. And of course, we're surely going to witness more and better electric and hybrid automobiles on roads all across the world. Well, when it comes to electric cars, Elon Musk's Tesla Motors nameplate has established itself as an important innovator in the market. And Teslas, as many of you know, they're sleek, they're powerful, they're truly luxury cars that sell at a premium to the market, and for good reasons. These are luxury automobiles.
Yeah, they're cool.
That are electric cars, and that really never was before. It really never was this idea that you could have a high-end luxury model that was rather expensive.
Yeah.
That would also be an electric car that would rely on
that also has whatever, 350 mile distance between charge, which is also unheard of.
And
at this point,
higher horsepower too. I mean,
exactly.
A lot of advancements there. But you know, innovation always contains an element of risk, let's be frank, and Tesla is really no exception. A recent analysis on the Green Car Reports website indicates that more than half of the drivetrains of early Tesla Model S cars, which was a model launched in the United States in 2012, may require replacement after as little as 60,000 miles. That analysis originally came from Plug in America, which is a nonprofit organization that supports and promotes electric automobiles. So they're talking about the drivetrains here, right, of Teslas and 60,000 miles. Now, there's a couple of things here to point out that I think are really important. First, Tesla offers an 8-year warranty that covers the drivetrain. So owners who do have a need for replacement won't have to go out of pocket on it until 2012 at the earliest, and given the normal driving conditions,
2020 at the earliest.
2020, I'm sorry, until 2020 at the earliest. So given normal driving conditions, a Tesla Model S from 2012 or 2013 is going to hit 60,000 miles, of course, way before 2020, right? I mean, you know, we were just talking before the show, 12 or 15,000 miles a year, I think, is average driving for most Americans. So over 8 years, you'd be way over 100,000 miles. So your drivetrain would be covered under Tesla. As you mentioned, that was actually an Elon Musk.
Well, right, yeah. I mean, in kind of researching this, what we learned is, you know, these drivetrain problems were reported fairly early, you know, 2012, 2013, 2014, there were complaints coming out that the drivetrains were failing. And Elon Musk, I mean, to his credit, actually stood up and said, you know, this warranty, we're going to, basically what he says, we're going to stand behind these drivetrains. If we're trying to say that an electric vehicle and batteries and drivetrain is superior to conventional vehicles, I've got to stand behind the warranty. And at that point, that's when he increased the warranty to 8 years and unlimited mileage on the high end. There's two S models. On the high end S, and 8 years, and I think either 100,000 or 125,000 on the lower end S series. So basically, he said, I'm going to stand behind the technology, even though there's a problem, we're going to stand behind it, and which is, you know, admirable. He's not trying to back out of it, you know. So
of course, and that's really kind of the only thing he could do. But I mean, that makes a lot of sense. You know, you're building a brand here, so you have to really do that. Well, that's the first thing. As I said, to take steps to correct that is offering that warranty. The other thing is that, you know, they were aware of these models, again, as you mentioned early, and the later models of the S series were certainly accommodating for that, and the improvement was there. Well, the point, again, I think, is that innovative companies and early adopters who support them are you know, sometimes they're taking a risk, and I don't think I'm going on a limb by saying that we can expect to see issues like this crop up in any product that is going to break the mold in any significant way. And I should point out, it's not just electric cars and hybrids that have issues, right? I mean, in the last year or so, we've read and reported on problems at Toyota and GM and Volkswagen, just to name a few. Cars are complicated things, and the industry reaches out to develop markets through new and ever more exotic innovations. And we as consumers need to bear that in mind. Those automakers are going to push the envelope. And if you're an early adopter, you've got to be willing to put up with things. Obviously, it can't be a safety issue, but
right.
Drivetrain, may not necessarily have the same life. You're going to hope that an Elon Musk or a company is going to stand behind it and offer a warranty or extended warranty to make good on it. But when you're an early adopter and you're supporting that, you're gonna maybe run into more risk than with a more established product that has maybe features that aren't quite as exotic.
Or I mean, just quickly, I mean, as another example, when the new iPhone came out, and it was like thinner. It's like, oh, it's awesome, it's thinner, until you start carrying it around in your back pocket, realizing that maybe thinner isn't better. Like
exactly.
Your butt-shaped, iPhone, right?
Your shelf.
Wasn't looking for that. Exactly.
The theory of unintended consequences. That's right.
Okay, in their article, What We Mean When We Talk About Data, authors Robert Califf and Rachel Sherman say that we are in the middle of a data revolution in healthcare. And by the way, both those authors work for the FDA. Mm-hmm. So they say that put together, networked systems, electronic health records, electronic insurance claims databases, social media, patient registries, and personal medical devices, make up an immense new set of sources for data about health and healthcare. In addition, these real-world sources, and we're talking about, let's say, biometric monitors of whatever type, the blood pressure cuffs that you can walk around, or if you've got a Fitbit or something like that.
Exactly. My Fitbit right here.
Yeah, exactly. So those devices, those real-world sources, can provide data about patients in the setting of their environments, whether at home or at work, and in the social context of their lives. But when we talk about data, what do we mean? Just what is data? And the authors basically say, look, raw data, the data that you're just simply collecting from your Fitbit or a CMM on the shop floor or whatever measurement device it is, raw data without context is meaningless. I mean, if you're walking around with a blood pressure monitor and you download it and all it tells you is your blood pressure taking at some random points in time, who knows, over a period of a week, all you have is dots. Mm-hmm. What were you doing at the time your blood pressure was going up and down? Were you fighting with your wife? Were you playing with the dog? Were you sleeping? Were you running? If you don't know the context, you have nothing other than these data points, which who knows what they say. So only when you have a context does the data become information. And then only after the information is analyzed do you have evidence. And then and only then can you use that evidence to solve a problem. So these are important distinctions, and they're not interchangeable. And I think, unfortunately, what happens too often is we use these data interchangeably. We use this information interchangeably, just like I'm doing. Right. Data, information, evidence, and we kind of toss these ideas back and forth as if they're the same, and they aren't. And I think we have to recognize that they aren't, and that's kind of what the authors are talking about. They're looking at it, obviously, from a healthcare perspective, and they're talking about, let's say, clinical trials versus real-world trials when it comes to healthcare. And they're saying, okay, well, we look at data from a clinical trial, and we think, oh, this is our raw data. We're going to take it, we're going to look at it, we're going to look at the results of these trials, and that tells us everything. Well, maybe not. The context of that trial is the sample of the control group, the sample of the group that's being tested. Are those people really representative of society or of let's say, a particular population in the United States? If they're not really representative, then what does that data actually mean? So you have to look at that data within the context of the population who's being tested and the population of the control group, and you have to really understand what that context means in order to really derive information and evidence that's going to allow you to go forward with some sort of healthcare protocol or medicine or medical device or whatever. So you have to really understand this. We look at this also in terms of they look at it also in terms of real world data. Mm-hmm. They say, okay, well, clinical trials is one thing, so you say, okay, well, we should look at real world data. So things like a Fitbit or a blood pressure monitor. They're saying, well, unless you know how that data is collected and what was that patient doing, as they said, at the time, again, you have kind of data that doesn't really mean anything. So all these data sources that are out there are important, but we have to be able to use them within the context of how the data is being collected in order to really derive actionable information and evidence that we can use, whether it's in a healthcare setting or any other setting. Another example that comes to mind is we talk about software.
Yeah.
Software companies do a heck of a lot of testing on their software because it's extremely complex, and they keep trying to come up with better and better methods to test it. But even they realize that testing it within the R&D development cycle tells you one thing. To really understand, you have to get it out into society. And that's why they have beta tests, where they say, hey, beta test our latest version of Firefox or Chrome or whatever the software is, and report back to us what bugaboos you're seeing so that we can fix them. Because they know that when you got a million people testing a software product, they are going to find things that you never could have found within the R&D development cycle. So it's important just to understand that as we move from data to information to evidence, whether it's in the lab, in the R&D, or the real world, the trick is to understand the context and shortcomings of each of those elements, data, information, and evidence, and what might be missing as you make a transition from one mode to the next. And only if you're doing that is that data really going to make sense in the real world.
Yeah, and it doesn't just happen with medical information, medical data, as you pointed out. I mean, it happens in so many different areas, in so many different ways, right? I mean, and this idea that you want to try to capture a real world experience as it's actually happening is a bugaboo that a lot of researchers have tripped up across in a lot of spaces over a lot of period of time. I mean, you think about, and we were just talking about this, the idea of the connection of food and diseases and how you really, how you live. And there's a big flaw in how people try to analyze, like, a food intake, right? I mean, you have to remember, what you ate, and you have to write it down, you have to report it. Well, people don't really do that really, really well. So the information that they draw out of that is, I was going to say, is probably flawed. It's definitely flawed.
Sure. Yeah.
It's definitely flawed. And trying to make a connection then between what people eat and whatever outcome it is, your blood pressure, cancer, whatever it may be, is going to not be really good information.
Not unless you got some guy running around behind you literally taking notes on what you're doing, because you're not doing it.
You're not doing it. You're not doing it. Well, you don't remember, you know? I mean, do you remember what you had for breakfast yesterday?
No.
I don't remember. I mean, I kind of remember.
Which
but not
one?
really. Yeah. I mean,
Was it the pre-breakfast donut, the breakfast, or the post-breakfast donut?
Well, you were here yesterday, so I mean, I think I remember about 8 cookies going down the hatch. But I
didn't eat any cookies.
These are issues, right? I mean, seriously, these are issues of trying to get a data set and draw a conclusion from it. Is that this real world thing that you're talking about is a real issue for people beyond just researchers and just beyond just medical device and beyond
and it applies to manufacturing. I mean, so much data collection is going on in manufacturing right now with the smart, Internet of Things and so forth. So it's what you do with that data and to use it sensibly.
And do you know what happened at the time when the data was collected? Do you know? And again, it breaks down a common cause, special cause. Do you know what was going on at a certain machine or on a certain shift, or who was doing that? Are you mapping that back to the other information, or are you just collecting it and saying, well, on average we have this? It's not helpful. It doesn't really say anything, right? I mean, these are the flaws that we're finding with big data. And this is a problem that has been recognized with big data for a long time.
Right.
The amount of data helps to kind of pervade or helps to get you away from the idea that you can really interpret it, because there's just too much to interpret.
Right.
And if you can't interpret it, it's not useful. And that's kind of what all these stories really talk about.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep, definitely. All right, well, thanks, Dirk. Well, in the Wednesday issue of Quality Digest Daily, we read an article by Diane Adams titled "Leadership Trumps Strategy." And this is interesting because it's an example of search engine misoptimization. Anytime you put the words leadership and strategy in a headline with Trump,
you don't come up with what you're expecting.
You're not going to get the kind of traffic you expect out of that article. Interesting that happens, but that's okay. But in the article, Adams offers examples of top executives who've made huge improvements in their organizations by not necessarily coming up with these incredible strategic imperatives, right? These strategies that are going to disrupt their respective markets, but rather by developing great cultures that allow their teams to be the best that they can be, right? Adams points out a couple of examples, including that of her own boss, Lars Bjork, who is the CEO of their company. Click, I think is the name of the company. It's QLIK, I think that's pronounced Click.
Yeah.
And they're an analytical technology company. Bjork works in tandem with Adams to focus on listening skills and communication within their organization. That's a big focus for their executive team. What they do is Bjork as the CEO and Adams as the communications person in their team realize that you need to foster communication throughout the organization, from the lowest person up to the executive suite. So they put a big focus on that, and that's a really good thing to build the right culture in your organization. Is listening skills and communications. You want to have that, because if you don't have that, people are going to feel like they're not part of the solution, not part of the team. And she talks about that too, is on the flip side, Adam shows how poor leaders and poor leadership actually destroys companies. Those poor leaders are going to play favorites, they're not going to listen, they're going to fail to provide the tools that their people need to do their jobs as easily and effectively as they possibly could, right? I mean, that happens all the time.
Right. I mean, it's funny, reading the story, we talk a lot about going to the Gemba, going to the shop floor to see what's actually going on. And I think, to me, this kind of touches on this idea, but I think of going to the cultural Gemba. And I think I guess what I mean by that is, just as it's important to go to the shop floor and see physically how things are being done, I think it's also important to be taking the pulse, as it were, of the culture of the company. And not only to see how your employees are reacting to different situations and the work environment and so forth, but for them to see how you react to their reaction of all those things, right? And to be getting a sense of what's really going on, not just physically on the floor, but culturally, emotionally, and so forth. I mean, it's just important, as important. You can have a process that works really, really well, but have very disengaged employees because of the culture.
I think the point you made there was really a good one. It's not only that you want it as an executive, you want to see the people do their work, but you want them to see you watching and doing their work and engaging, because it's a 360-degree thing. I mean, you want them to know that you're engaged with what they're doing and you're curious about it, and you want to ask questions and get feedback and give suggestions, and maybe you hear something from them. You say, well, it would be better if we had this support. Well, great, that's a great thing to know, right? I mean, that's what great leaders do, and that's how great companies are built. What came to mind for me when I read this story was my old career, a couple of careers ago, in magazine distribution back in New York. I had a lot of clients, and obviously, what we were consultants who worked within single copy sales, magazine distribution at the newsstand, right? So we had a lot of different companies that we worked with and worked for, and many of them had very similar business models and very similar topics. And I'm not going to name any names here, but one of my clients these two clients were both in the kind of the home improvement, cooking, health fields in some way or another. They were competitors, but they both really were fishing in very similar waters. Well, one of them was very much focused on enriching the lives of their employees and their customers. They had an ethos that worked all the way through. They had a campus, a real campus, and this is 20 years ago, before campuses were so big with companies. They had a real campus where they had gourmet healthy food cooked in the cafeteria. They had a lot of workout stations throughout the campus. They encouraged a lot of bicycling to and from work and throughout the campus. They had shared bikes all over the place where people could use. It was a really cool situation. And they were a family-owned company. Very important, family-owned company, not public. Now, the other one was based in New York and had a traditional, kind of a big office building in New York City and a lot of employees. And their idea of growth and success was to acquire a lot of different magazine titles and try to build profit that way and wring all the profit they could out of it. And now they were public with shareholders. They traded on the New York Stock Exchange. Well, I mean, you can see where this is going. I mean, there's a difference in the top down in how you're going to treat your employees, how you're going to treat your customers, in terms of, again, the ethos of what you want to bring to your brand and what you want to do. And great leaders understand that all of it connects, all of it stacks on top of one another. And if you can't do it that way, and if you can't carry that through, your users, your customers are never going to get the benefits of really enjoying what you can offer. If you're just looking at it from a top-down thing about making money and satisfying your shareholders, you're never going to get to that.
It's interesting. I mean, that thing you just talked about ties so well in, I think, to the next story. I mean, kind of the last bit you were talking about, the one company, their concern was being basically, in other words, as broad as possible to cover as many topics and market niches as possible in order to continue to grow. And my guess is probably watering down certainly their culture, but perhaps even their customer base as well, because doing a lot of things but not really well, as opposed to doing one thing really well.
Exactly right.
Well, the next article, first of all, I want you to listen to this quote. This is a great quote. Quote is, "Too many companies attempt to do too many things with one plant and one organization. In the name of low investment in facilities and spreading their overheads, they add products, markets, technologies, processes, quality levels, and supporting services which conflict and compete with each other and compound expense. And then they hire more staff to regulate and control the unmanageable mixture of problems." This came from Wickham Skinner in the article "The Focused Factory" in Harvard Business Review. Now, guess when that was written?
I don't know.
1974.
30.
Well, 40 years ago. 42 years ago.
Wow.
Interesting. Now, just to define this, if you haven't heard of Focused Factory, it's basically a factory, and we're talking a factory here, that manufactures one type of product really well in order to meet the company's strategy of competing well in one market niche. In other words, it's focused on producing one thing. Skinner goes on to say that the problem with unfocused factories is that you end up with, in Skinner's words, a hodgepodge of compromises, a high overhead, and a manufacturing organization that is constantly in hot water with top management, marketing management, the controller, and of course, in the end, their customers.
Right.
His argument is that a factory should be focused on a narrow product mix for a particular market niche, and that in doing so, it's going to outperform the conventional plant, which attempts a broader mission like the publishing company we're talking about.
Exactly right.
And then he outlines how to do this, and the concept was really widely embraced back in the day. It's an interesting reading. Look it up, Focused Factory, Harvard Business Review. Well, in an article we ran this week by Luc von Hassenhofe, How Focused Factories Deal with Disruption, Hassenhofe points out that focused factories may be falling out of favor today, and maybe for all the wrong reasons. And he says that the problem is that CEOs are nervous about rapid change, and today's market and global economy and so forth is nothing but rapid change. And so their feeling is, well, we can't have a focused factory. We've got to be agile. We've got to be able to zig and zag as the market changes.
Right.
And so they see this focus as kind of like all backwards. But Hassenhofe points to how HP went through several drastic market changes by being focused. And those of you who are old enough to have lived through the age of personal computing know how it went. I mean, first of all, in personal computing, there was innovation. Quality and innovation ruled, and this was, let's say, the 70s. Then came commoditization in the PC market, and we're talking maybe the 90s, and that's where price ruled because everybody was making PCs.
Right.
And then came, let's say, the customization market in the 2000s. You know, give me exactly what I want when I want it. And we think of like a company, let's say like Gateway or Dell, but everybody else basically started doing the same thing. You could build your own computer within a brand, right? So at each phase, Hassenhofe points to the HP plant in Herrenberg, Germany. As an example, it changed its market strategy at each of these crucial points and then developed a focused factory to meet those goals. They didn't try to just expand to like, oh, you know, we got to start, use the same factory, now let's make things cheaper, and oh no, now we've got to start customizing and simply keep building. They simply retooled each time. They saw where the market was going, they knew what their strengths and weaknesses were, and they simply retooled at each juncture in order to do that. So the idea is that trying to cover all bases is not necessarily a good thing. And I will point out that in the study that I've done on focus factories, this is actually a very good idea, but it does tend to make sense only for products that have long life cycles. In other words, you know, in the case we're talking about HP, each of these divisions, if you will, are like 10 years apart.
Right.
So, to retool every 10 years, Okay, expensive, but not a bad idea, and certainly you're going to recover your cost. But if you're talking about products, if your company develops and markets and sells and builds products with short life cycles, yeah, then you're probably looking at more wanting to integrate, a flexible manufacturing or agile manufacturing or lean manufacturing. Some have even said, well, maybe what you really want to do is combine a focus factory with one of these other types. So it gives you kind of that leeway to do something. But interesting.
Yeah, well, the idea of a lean factory and a focus factory to me is interesting because, to me, this really is a lean approach because you're trying to, rather than, again, serve all masters, you're trying to be very, very focused and intentional in terms of how you're going to provide. You have a certain limited amount of space within a factory. You have a certain limited amount of people in a factory, time. There's limits to your inventory of all those different things. So you want to be as profitable and as efficient as you can be. That to me is lean, is very much a lean approach.
Right, except that in one paper I read, which was presented at the, Production and Operations Managers Conference, I think POM Conference, Production Operations Managers, I think, back in 2004, said, well, one of the problems with lean is that its focus, really, the focus of lean is to take your existing process and how can we make it more efficient. But you still may be still working within this, let's say, broad product mix. So you still could have an unfocused factory that you're leaning out, and that still may not be the ideal solution as opposed to focus and then lean.
Yeah, these are kind of interchangeable. A lot of these things are depending on the individual factory and what they need to do. And the other thing is, it's not really just about factories. You mentioned to me this really is factories. Well, it is, but this principle I think applies to any process you may be doing. Even in a transactional environment or a service industry. Again, you have a certain amount of inventory. You have people, you have hours, you have production, you have things you need to do. And you need to choose. As a manager, you need to decide, where are we going to focus our energies on doing this? And markets change. Markets change all the time. It happened to us, right, where our market changed several years ago, and we needed to figure out how to utilize the resources that we had and the limited inventory that we have to make it work in the most efficient way. So, it is factories. What he's talking about here is specifically geared towards, making stuff.
Making stuff.
Yeah. But it also, to me, I look at it as an extension, and I say, well, you can benchmark against that. You can say, well, the kernel of that idea is how do you take what you have and as markets shift, adapt it in an efficient way to serve what you need to do now. And you can do it. You can do it in anything. You can do it in publishing. We did it in publishing. So to me, anybody out there who's doing anything in quality or improvement is going to have good value, I think.
I think the takeaway is you don't try to be
all things, all people.
All things, all people.
Yeah, you got to decide what you want to do.
Okay.
All right. Well, I think we're going to bypass our tweet this week because we're running a little late. Well, we'll say that tweet. It's a great tweet. We'll save it for you next week.
Okay.
Yes. So we'll do that. But that's our show for this week. Thank you all for joining us. That was our first show of 2016. Wow. Went by fast.
Wow.
Next week we have another great week of QDL here on Friday, and of course starting on Monday, another 5 great days of QDD. So come back and join us on Monday for that. Dirk, have a good weekend.
You too.
All of you have a good weekend, and we'll see you next week.
So long.
Bye.